I looked at this agreement and I said, this is unethical.
Former Democratic National Committee Chair Donna Brazile takes pot shots at Debbie Wasserman Schultz and at the 2016 presidential candidate. We've got a one-on-one interview.
A daring escape. One of Venezuela's most vocal opposition leaders is now in Spain. We will hear the reaction from Caracas.
He is back. Former Miami Mayor Joe Carollo in a runoff for a Miami Commission seat with newcomer Alfie Leon. We have one of those candidates with us live today.
Good morning. So great to be with you as always. A busy news week this week in South Florida as national issues like sexual harassment and messy elections land in local headlines. And we are going to begin with fractures in the Democratic Party, the abrupt resignation of Florida Party Chair Stephen Battelle of Miami. Half a dozen women who worked with him around him said he was creepy and inappropriate. We'll get to that on the roundtable, but first, the state of the National Democratic Party. Former DNC Chair Donna Brazile has written a blunt tell-all account of last year's presidential race and the turmoil at the DNC, and she blames much of that on the then chair, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the congresswoman from Weston. She's been unusually silent about Brazile's accusations.
Your overall reactions to Donna Brazile's book? And your role in it, your prominence in it.
I'm focused on doing the best job that I can to represent my constituents.
Donna Brazile was in South Florida this week for the Miami Book Fair, where I had a chance to sit down with her, ask her about her new book. It is called Hacks. Let's begin with something really important in South Florida. Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, when she was the DNC chair, did she put her thumb on the scale and favor Hillary Clinton and skew the election, the primary?
Well, first of all, I handed the gavel over to Debbie back in 2011, and of course, I got the gavel back in 2016 as a result of the hacking. I don't think Debbie or anyone else could have put their thumbs on a scale to change the trajectory of the primary process. The power of the chair is really to run the day-to-day operations of the DNC. She did not set the primary dates, nor did she count the votes. What she did, and many people were upset about, was she came up with 6 debates. And many people were upset with that. And of course,
Bernie Sanders was upset.
Well, not just Bernie. It was Martin O'Malley and the other 2 as well, Lincoln Chafee and Jim Webb. But Debbie's a friend. I give her some tough love in the book. It's the kind of love that comes from a sister to another sister, because I think that, as chair of the party, we should have known what was going on. We should have known about the financial agreements, and honestly, I think we should have known long before June 14th. The officers should have known about the hack and what was happening.
All right, well, let me read from your book. This is what you wrote at that point. You said, the funding agreement with Hillary for America and the Victory Fund argument was not illegal, but it sure looked unethical. So when you first saw this funding agreement between the Clinton campaign and the DNC and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, you just didn't think it's passed the smell test?
It was very upsetting because I kept thinking to myself, why is it taking 2 hours or 3 hours to get a press release out? Why am I not able to spend money that I'm raising? And it took me several weeks to find out. And it upset me because while it's not illegal to come up with a joint fundraising agreement, the memorandum of understanding was between the Clinton campaign and the staff of the DNC. And to give control, it's like you're the homeowner, but you just gave away your basement, your attic, and your garage.
So now, that's tilting it in favor of Hillary Clinton.
Well, that's given that's given one campaign unfair advantage of taking over the House. And so I looked at this agreement and I said, this is unethical. How did this come about? And once I got all the way through the forensics that I promised Bernie Sanders that I would do, I called him and I told him it broke my heart, but I had to tell him the truth.
In the book, you say that Debbie mismanaged the DNC. How so? Was it financial? Did she spend too much money? What did she do?
Well, at a time when the party's hemorrhaging money and you're broke, you need to figure out ways to cut the budget. And when you don't cut the budget, when you allow people to earn upwards of $25,000 a month, Now, I know a lot of consultants. I know some of the most brilliant people and brilliant minds in the world. But at $25,000 a month, and they don't show up in the office, you cut them off, or you reduce their pay. I did that when I became chair. Debbie did not, and that upset me greatly. So I cut them off. And some of those friends they've criticized me, but I cut them off because we were hemorrhaging money. Do you want $25,000 to go to 4 or 5 consultants inside the Beltway, or do you want it to go outside in the places like Broward County, like Miami-Dade County, Volusia? You know, I know Florida by counties. I prefer that the money come to the grassroots and not stay within the Beltway.
Right. After Hillary Clinton had won the nomination, Donna, and she fainted, had a fainting spell, and it gave you pause, and you thought seriously about replacing her with Joe Biden and Cory Booker as the vice president. How far did that go?
Well, I was worried. I was worried about Hillary. I was worried about her health. I saw her 2 days before her collapse, and I wanted to know if she needed, you know, I have this special tea. I call it special, but it's this herbal mint tea that helps you with what I call throat and other issues. And I offered that to her. I also said, you might need some acupuncture. 2 days later, when she collapsed, I got a call from a former colleague, and he said, what happened to Hillary? I said, nothing. I just saw her 2 days ago. And I called the campaign. I said, what happened to Secretary Clinton? They said nothing. So I let it go. An hour later, John King, my former colleague at CNN, said, she fainted. I said, no, she didn't. And I was trying to defend her. But when I've learned that there was a video and it went viral, right, my phone rang off the hook so badly that I described in the book that I unplugged it. I still have an old landline. I unplugged it, but I was getting calls from people all across the country, not just media people, right, but Democrats. The former chair of the Democratic National Committee spoke out publicly and said the DNC must consider. Now, our rules stipulate that in the case of death, resignation, or disability, the national chair shall confer. I kept my own counsel. I did not, you know, go out there and publicly do anything but support Secretary Clinton. But I kept my own counsel, and I thought about all of the different combinations that I would have to consider and making some recommendations to the party. Right.
Stronger together, her campaign mantra theme. I always wondered, what does that mean? I never, honestly, I must have attended 15 Hillary Clinton rallies. I kept waiting for a definition, and I think I was fair-minded. I never really got it, and I think a lot of voters didn't get it. Did you get it?
Well, you know, I wasn't managing her campaign. I wasn't in charge of her messaging, nor was I part of her strategy calls. I was the chair of the Democratic National Committee. She was one of many candidates that we supported. Stronger Together, I assume, you know, based on what they told me, was a message that said that the country can grow more prosperous, grow safer, whatever, if we're together. It was a message of unity. I think it got lost in the midst of the conversation about the 140 characters from our tweeter-in-chief, as well as all of the media obsession with her emails.
Yeah. Let's move on to a story very much of the moment. Roy Moore in Alabama. First of all, do you find the women who have accused him of sexually molesting them or trying to have sex with them, do you find them credible?
I believe the women. As a woman myself, I know how difficult it is to come forward, especially, you know, with what happens when you tell your story. Especially women who have been harassed or said something inappropriate. And for many of us, you know, people believe that you tell your sister, you tell your mother, you tell your best friend, but you keep it to yourself. It's like a hidden wound inside your soul for the rest of your life. I believe those women. I believe that they have come forward because they have seen this as an injustice. We should have a zero tolerance policy with regard to sexual harassment. So many people have used their power to control, their power to demean, their power to disrespect others. And I think we need to have a healthy conversation about it, but we should have a zero tolerance policy.
Donna Brazile, great to be able to speak with you. Congratulations on the book, and
thank you.
Glad to have this opportunity.
It's always a pleasure to be back in Florida.
Donna Brazile also went on to say she thinks the people of Alabama should and will reject Roy Moore.
We'll talk more about that. But next, the runoff race is underway for Miami's highly contested commission seat, and one of the candidates is right here with us next.
Tuesday is Election Day in the city of Miami. Voters in District 3 are going to choose a new commissioner for that District 3 seat.
And in fact, early voting is already underway and has been in a runoff that has gotten tense and aggressive. We invited the two candidates, Joe Carollo and Alfe Leon, to be with us today. Mr. Carollo declined. Alfe Leon accepted our invitation and is right here to talk about what has been one of those only in Miami style races, has it not?
It is. Anything can happen. Thank you. Good morning to both of you.
Thank you for being with us.
Alfie, we're glad you're here. Explain to us and to the voters of District 3 and the voters at large, why are you the best candidate in this race?
Well, first of all, the hard work we put in, the voters we've met, and the neighbors we've met. We went from January till now knocking on doors. We've knocked on over 20,000 doors. I hand wrote almost 2,500 thank you cards. And every time I went to someone's door, I asked them what their issues were. So we're not just a campaign about politics, but about issues.
What are the issues?
Oh, the issues are cost of living, transportation and traffic, beautification, the need for more police presence, and having a commissioner that wants to listen to the issues and then actually work day to day on them and not just come around every 4 years for a vote.
So that's what you got knocking on doors, but then there was a backstory there. So as a first-time candidate, you wake up one morning and say, what, I think I want to run for commission. What happened in the city of Miami that spurred this run?
Two things. One, I worked in the city. During law school, I actually served as an intern and a law clerk, and then I went to go work as a policy advisor in City Hall.
And for Frank Carollo.
For Frank Carollo. And what
brother of your opponent.
Yes, this is like a Greek mythology, you know. But one day I came,
soap opera.
Or soap opera, novella. But my wife, one day I came home and I was kind of saying, you know, I wish that we did more for our neighborhood and more for our community. And it's not just about pastelito politics. It's about real issues in the community. And she said, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? If you want to make a difference, be the difference. And with her support and my family's support, I resigned from my job, and 2 weeks later I announced in August of last year.
All right, well, as we said at the outset, Joe Carollo, who I've only known for about 30 years, is not with us this morning, said he thought he could be more useful in the campaign out on the campaign trail. But let me ask you one thing he has brought up, and that is from 2012 to 2014, you voted out of an address in Kendall. Now, you and your wife moved into the district, but I mean, are you a latecomer to the city of Miami?
No, I was born and raised right off of Lejeune and Northwest 7th by Ocean Bank. My parents raised me there. My parents got divorced. Later in high school, I moved with my dad to Kendall, and much like millions of college students in Florida, I maintained my residency at my father's home while I lived in the dorms at FIU, while I lived in an apartment with some college friends. And once I established my life with my wife, who we got married only a few years ago, and got my bar license, I said, now I can move my entire livelihood where we live. But we just bought our home 2 years ago in Little Havana. I'm a proud resident of my neighborhood. I live in the heart of Little Havana, where my parents actually met 2 blocks away at Miami High. Where
All right, let me interrupt you if I can. Please. One more allegation that Mr. Carollo made without any evidence was you have a somewhat substantial mortgage on your home, and he says influence peddlers. He had no evidence whatsoever. He says influence peddlers are helping you buy this home.
The only person that's helping me, that's sacrificing every day for me, is my wife. My wife, and we live in 2017 where a woman can actually bring home the bacon, and she's allowed me to dedicate my time for my campaign and my law practice, but it's not as easy to bring in money when you're knocking on doors every day.
So who are your biggest contributors? Who are you relying on?
Well, good friends and family that helped me in the first round. In the first round, I raised $60,000 compared to my competitor who raised $427,000. People really didn't know who I was until about 2 weeks ago.
You know, you're in a race where the big money, you know, Michael's known Joe Carollo for 30 years. He's been in Miami politics for 30 years, and Miami politics has been, what did you call it, a Greek comic tragedy, a circus? It has been.
And a contact sport.
A contact sport, and one of the most aggressive in that contact sport has been Joe Carollo, and in this race it's been very aggressive.
Yes.
How have you decided to, you know, you got a little negative as well in your mailings.
Of course.
How do you keep the focus off of that and on the issues?
Well, first of all,
you feel like you've done that? Because
yes.
publicly, I'm not sure that that's happened.
Well, we always go to talk to our neighbors, and I say it like this: when you want to sell someone a car, you don't say how bad the competitor's car is. You talk about how good you are. We tell our neighbors that we're here to solve the issues in the community that have been stagnant for 30 years. While there's mail that goes out from his campaign that doesn't have his name, phone number, or picture, anything I send out that's from my committee, that's from it has my name, it has my picture, because I want people to know who I am. Yeah. And it's a comparative. Do you want someone that for 30 years has had both some experience but negative scandal, or do you want someone that's a fresh new face to work with the city?
So you're trying to be optimistic and upbeat and not simply on the negative. Let me ask you about this, Alfie. Former Miami Mayor Xavier Suarez and his crew have been supporting you, but current mayor, new mayor, Francis Suarez, says he's neutral in this race. If you are elected, are you inclined to support his agenda as you understand it?
Well, I look at it, we're both young professionals. We're both individuals. He was first elected at 29. I'm running at 32. We both represent areas that are next to each other when he was at District 4. But I'll say this, we need someone that wants to bring vision and talk about the issues and not talk about ghosts and shadows. We need someone that really wants to work every day. And one thing I would always say that Commissioner Suarez brought to the table, and now Mayor Suarez, was constituent services and being accessible. And I will follow that suit. I want to take care of my neighbors, and I want to make sure they know my phone number and know how to get a hold of me.
Mayor Suarez is looking to make that position a strong mayor position in the city. There's 5 people on that dais. Would you support that?
We need to have a discussion in front of the sunshine with all of our colleagues. I think it's important to have an accountable mayor.
Is that a yes or a no?
I want to talk to my neighbors first, and I also like to see if there's an appetite for it in the dais. But it's going to be done in the sunshine. It's going to be done door to door when I talk to my neighbors about if they'd like to see a strong mayor. Yeah. And that's important because I think it may help our government, but we have to look into it.
One of the things you told the Miami Herald editorial board, and in fact the editorial board of the Herald endorsed you, recommended you in this race, was that you think there is way too much litter and waste around in District 3. It's really the most Cuban, heavily Hispanic district in the city of Miami. Do you think it's been neglected?
Yes. I think that we steer a lot of our tax dollars to areas that are already luxury areas. Brickell. And I think that we put a lot of focus on cleaning up Calle Ocho where the tourists go. But when you go 2 blocks back on Southwest 9th Street, which is by Shenandoah, or 2 blocks north on Southwest 7th Street, the amount of trash you see in the street is not at the fault of the residents. It's at the fault of the city of not doing a better job of cleaning up and educating the residents. We have so many community groups that are ready to come and clean. During our campaign, we did social responsibility where we did trash cleanups, graffiti cleanups. And I think it's like the broken window theory. If you clean up a neighborhood, people start noticing it. It helps fight crime. It helps increase morale and pride. And I think that's the focus that we're going to do day one as commissioner.
Yeah, constituent services and street politics. But one of the things the city is facing is this $400 million bond referendum. A lot of big projects on the horizon that really everyone in South Florida, not just in the city of Miami, are facing. What's your take on that? Sea level rise, a little bit for law enforcement, affordable housing.
Yes. These are all priorities. And I feel like the bond, with the dollars that are going to be coming in, we need to focus on how do we make our city resilient? How do we take best practices from around the globe and bring them to Miami? The other thing I think is crucial is the affordable housing. We need to make sure that when we have affordable housing that comes from the city bonds, that the highest percentage of residents that are going to get those affordable housing units are city residents.
So many details that are not there yet.
Yes. All right. Well, Alfie Leon, great to have you come in, and we'll see what happens on Tuesday. And if you are elected, we will be in touch. But in any event, thank you for running. Thanks for offering your service.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, talk about escaping by the skin of your teeth. That is what this guy did. He is the former mayor of Caracas. He escaped the country, went to Spain.
And we will take you live to Caracas right after the break.
This morning, the mayor of Caracas, Venezuela, Antonio Ledesma, is free. He is in exile late this week. Somehow he escaped to Colombia and then he flew on to Spain.
Ledesma had been under house arrest in Caracas in custody for at least the last 2 years by the Maduro government that accused him of plotting a coup. His escape caps a week of spiraling economic turmoil and fears Venezuela's financial default on its international creditors is imminent. And with all that on the table, we go straight to our correspondent there, Cody Weddle, live with us from Caracas.
Good morning, Cody.
Good morning.
Good morning, Glenna and Michael. Yeah, it still remains somewhat of a mystery how exactly the former mayor of Caracas, Antonio Ledesma, managed to pull this off, a daring escape. He would later show up in the Colombian border town of Cucuta, where he offered some details. He said he had set off on this 15-hour drive to the border, that he had passed 29 police and National Guard checkpoints on his way, and that he hadn't told anyone about this. He had only consulted his conscience, he said. He also had to escape a permanent outpost of the intelligence police outside of his home. And when this news broke, we were outside of his home, and those intelligence police really descending on his apartment complex, dozens of them. They had masks. Many of them had rifles, but at that point, there wasn't much they could do. He was already in Colombia. His wife would later denounce that his apartment there in Caracas was raided by those intelligence police. Now, Antonio Ledesma, one of the most prominent opposition politicians here in Venezuela, he was arrested, as you said, in 2015, charged with plotting a coup. He, of course, says those were trumped-up charges. He was later put under house arrest, really gained international attention in August of this year when those intelligence police yanked him out of his home in the middle of the night. That video would be posted online. He would once again be returned to house arrest. He is now in Spain, as you said, and he says he plans to continue to denounce the Maduro regime abroad. You also mentioned we've been talking a lot about default. A trade group this week in the United States declared that the state oil company here had entered into default. It's a very unique situation, though, because that payment that they were referring to was later made. It didn't have a grace period, so they will meet again on Monday. They could take legal action, but it's believed that they might just let this slip since that payment was eventually made. Glenna, Michael?
No, you reported here last week that on Monday there was this meeting of international bondholders in Caracas, and Vice President Tarek El-Assimi was going to address them and talk about how restructuring the debt. But we're told that he spent an hour doing a monologue and really didn't explain anything about restructuring the debt of Venezuela.
You're right, Michael. Really a bizarre situation. You know, they lured these bondholders here to Caracas. He spent an hour, as you said, speaking to them. They gave them chocolates, they gave them candy, but these folks weren't interested in that. They wanted to talk about whether Venezuela was going to default. But they didn't reach any conclusion, and the bondholders who sort of told the press what had happened said a lot of it was propaganda. You know, they talked about the Chavez's legacy, so it was a bizarre situation, and no agreement was reached on Monday.
More to come. Cody Weddle from Caracas, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Cody.
Up next, we take all of the big topics of the week right to the roundtable. Stay tuned.
It is that time again, time for a deeper dive into the week's top news stories with our Powerhouse Roundtable. Boy, we've got a good one for you today.
And so, some introductions first. Melba Pearson is the Deputy Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Florida. And before that, a prosecutor with the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office. H.D. Smith, Miami attorney, law professor, and longtime South Florida civil rights leader. And welcome to the roundtable to Jay Narang, a business executive in Broward, who serves on the executive board of the Republican Party of Florida. So glad to have you aboard.
Good morning to you all. Jay, we're
morning.
glad to have you come in. Saw you at the Republican convention last summer, where in fact you were a delegate. Let's begin with Democratic politics, though. And HC, let me begin by asking you, Steve Battelle, wealthy millionaire, real estate developer, chairman of the Florida Democratic Party for just about 1 year. On Friday, Politico reports that 6 women who worked with him said he made creepy comments, talked about their bodies, leered at them, invited them to go on his private jet. I mean, this is very unpleasant stuff.
This is just another exhibit in the sexual misconduct that occurs often with people who are rich and powerful, who believe that their power and their richness gives them freedom to use women's bodies as another play toy. I really love what Donald Trump said about it. Donald Trump says, you know, they let me kiss them, and they let me grab their pudenda because I'm a star.
I was sweating that one out for a moment.
No,
HT.
yeah, but because no, it's like a victim of a robbery. They don't give the pocket purse because you want you to have it, because they have a gun. And the people have power over the women. They can't get a better job. They can't get promoted. They can't go whatever. So yes, they let you because you can't do anything. They can't do anything about it. And we've got to stop that. Zero tolerance.
And it's so true. As a son of a mother, a brother to a sister, a husband to a wife, and a father of 2 daughters, I think women have the right to go in and perform their day-to-day duties without having to go through this kind of abuse. I think it's despicable, the behavior that goes on, just like Senator Franken. I mean, that's documented evidence there. Harvey Weinstein, all these things are coming out, and these individuals need to pay for that, and they need to step away from the public discourse because they don't have any place.
You just mentioned Democrats. There are plenty of Republicans.
Absolutely. This is
Roy Moore, the president.
Right.
Why has this taken on a political tone? Melba, this is not about politics.
It is not, because sexual harassment knows no boundaries. It doesn't know race. All it knows is power and exploitation. And I think we need to look at the fact that this is a watershed moment happening, where this is an incredible era where women are coming forward and men behaving badly will no longer be tolerated. And I hope that the good people, the good God-fearing people of Alabama see through and see that the character of that candidate is not someone who's fit to sit
You know,
in the
Jay,
Senate.
let me get your comment on this. I think that back when Anita Hill testified in the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings, this country tried to have this conversation but failed. And failed in part because the senators didn't believe Anita Hill. A lot of other people, including me, thought there was something to that. Have we reached the tipping point on the way men act towards women, particularly in the workplace?
I think more so than the tipping point, what's happened is the millennial generation, the newer generation, is not going to stand for this. They are liberated, much more willing to take chances. They are not going to do a job at a place where they're not going to be treated with respect. And I mean, we had the same thing with Monica Lewinsky instances. Now we are hearing that. It's not you're right, it's not just a partisan issue, it's a bipartisan issue. It does not matter which party you belong to. And the same thing with Judge Moore. If he actually performed those acts, and he has been involved in that.
Are you not sure that he?
It has,
9 women?
In
Is that enough? Nine women?
You're talking
Banned
about.
from them all?
See, that's the thing. I think you being an attorney
Yes.
and you being civil liberties
But we're not in court, Jay.
attorney. One of the things that you should pay attention to, and you should probably give credence to, is that you're innocent until proven guilty. I'm not going to stand here and defend him. However, I will say every man has a right to face their accusers and be able to
let's look at the
clear their
facts.
name if there's evidence.
For
example, in case I'm going to finish real quick. I'm going to finish real quick. For example, in case of Senator Franken, I mean, there's photographic evidence.
Let's get to Franken in a moment. Let's go back to Roy Moore. Go ahead, HD.
We've got 9 women saying that Roy did this. With regard to the 14-year-old, Roy Moore's response was, I don't remember doing it. Matter of fact, I don't remember her. And at that time, when I was 32, I would ask the permission of the parents before I go out with a 14-year-old. Roy, if you have to ask permission, they're too young to go out with.
But doesn't that bring up a really interesting point? In every single instance that might not have a photograph to go with it, it's always a he said, she said. And there could be 20 she saids, and there will still be someone who says, where's the evidence?
And as a former prosecutor, I call that testimonial evidence. When somebody gets on the stand and says, so-and-so did this to me, the jury makes a decision as to whether or not the person is credible. But sometimes I've gone into court, I didn't have picture, I didn't have a DNA. I had the word of a victim that I believe.
But this is the court of public opinion, though.
Yes,
yes it is.
And what's happening here is look at the timing. Judge Moore has been in political life for 30 years, and it pops up now.
And was
because, to your point before, the context is so much different now than it was in Anita Hill.
With Bill Clinton, Bill Cosby, and Bill O'Reilly. People are afraid that their careers will be destroyed if they come forward. And they will be put in a circus, a national circus, like the women who've accused Moore. We're on a very, very dangerous path. We're on a highway to internal decay, and we all have front seats. Most democracies last 200 years. We're 41 years past our expiration date, and we better get some moral clarity.
But if I may say, the genius of America and our founders was that we always find a way to renew ourselves, and we must, or else we will begin
and that's
to
the
decay.
Key.
All right, Melba, let me ask you, in the case of Al Franken, this photograph of him with his hand on the breast of the sleeping woman.
Disgusting.
I mean, that is really disgusting.
Absolutely disgusting.
Boring.
But I will say this. He was caught out there with it. He wrote a letter of apology to the
Ms.
woman.
Tweeden.
Right, correct. And, you know, she read that in the public sphere.
And
he offered to himself up to the ethics committee saying, hey, go ahead and investigate
he should take
me.
some inspiration from Senator Clemens. He should take some inspiration from Mr. Biddle, and he should step down.
Okay,
that
I have a
kind of
question.
behavior is not acceptable in public discourse.
That behavior
and
that
so
we
should
just,
Roy Moore step aside.
that
out of
behavior that we
action.
just saw
Yes.
in that photograph, is that bullying? Is it harassment? Is it drunken
Assault.
frat boy
Yeah,
behavior?
now that's
Is it
sexual
assault?
assault.
What is
In
that?
Florida, that is a crime.
Is there
it's an
contact?
illegal touching.
Is there a contact
And also
there?
the fact that he went up,
hard to
excuse
tell.
me, the fact that he went up to her, allegedly rehearsing this skit, and kissed her and put his tongue in her mouth.
Absolutely.
I mean, is that a sexual assault?
That is definitely a sexual assault, and I applaud him for at least apologizing, and she accepted it. With regard to Battelle, he didn't apologize. He said, I am sorry for those who felt uncomfortable.
But
he didn't say I
used
did anything wrong.
He had used the word "I apologize," but he didn't say he didn't do any of this.
Right, you're correct. He did not say, I'm apologizing for what I did. He's saying, I apologize for what you felt. Donald Trump, we're not going to get away from Donald Trump with my new friend here. 16 women said Donald Trump abused them. Trump admitted it on the access tape.
You can go dumpster diving all day. The crux of the matter is this is an issue.
He should resign.
This is an issue in our political scenario today. You are saying we are on a slippery slope. I think it's on a good path because now women are coming out. They're showing courage. They're standing up to these men who are abusive to them, and they are saying no more. I think this is a great direction our country is taking, and I feel happy for my two daughters when they grow up and go in the workforce and they go intern in some office. I don't want them to be subject to that kind of nonsense.
And not to mention,
I think this is the time.
And let's turn the focus back to the women.
Exactly.
These brave women who have bared their souls with nothing to gain.
Exactly.
And have their private life
Melba.
on display. And they're in tears talking about a horrible personal experience that they had, how they were victimized. And still, media and other people are like, no, she must be lying. No, she must have something to gain. The victim blaming has to stop.
Can we stop for, I hate to do this, I'm so sorry. But we really need to take a commercial break. And we'll be right back.
Okay.
Don't kill the messenger.
Welcome back. Live in our studio this morning, an all-star crew for the roundtable, and we are having a talk about a discussion here about sexual harassment, sexual assault, and maybe we've reached the tipping point. And Jane Orang, I have to ask you, on Thursday night, President Trump sent out a tweet about Al Franken and his repulsive behavior, which he has admitted. The president said this picture of Franken groping this woman's breast is really, really bad. The Al Franken, here it is, the Al Frankenstein picture is really bad, speaks 1,000 words. Where do his hands go in pictures 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 while she sleeps? He has not, however, denounced Roy Moore. And then the question I would ask you is, given the fact that 16 women have accused the president of inappropriate sexual behavior, does he really have moral ground to stand on to be criticizing Al Franken?
So the way I look at this is, again, like I said earlier in the previous segment, this is a bipartisan issue. This is not an individual issue. I mean, it does not matter whether you're Republican
you're right.
or
You're right. It's not. It's a not. Excuse me. A nonpartisan issue. But he's criticizing a Republican, and then here is a Democrat, and then here's this Republican accused of something I think is much more serious, also disgusting. But he's not denouncing him.
Well, perhaps because of the same reasons that I'm saying, that there's no evidence here. Al Franken, there's a picture right there. There's accusations.
There's this yearbook that's got more writing to the girl when she was 17 years old in her high school yearbook. I mean, that seems to be...
Right. But you know, one of the points I wanted to make on this is that this is a perfect example why we need more women involving legislatures across this country and in Congress. Do you know that right now, a head of a company can sexually assault an employee, settle for $1 million, keep it confidential, and then write off the settlement as well as the attorney's fees as an ordinary and necessary business expense. That is the law right now. If women were involved in legislation, there is absolutely no way. How can that be an ordinary business expense? Maybe at the Playboy Mansion, but definitely not at Apple and other companies. So
well,
this needs to stop.
Part of the Harvey Weinstein story, we learned that he had an entire team whose sole mission was to take care of those kind of allegations and settlements and lawsuits.
And even Congress had to look at the way they handle sexual harassment and sexual assault, because unless the accuser comes forward, nothing public happens, and it gets to stay within this cone of silence. They'll have their hearings behind closed doors, and then there's no accountability for the lawmaker and the behavior they've been engaging.
All right, if we can, let's move on, because I do want to ask about Donna Brazile comments that she made in my interview and her allegations against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, that she mismanaged the DNC, that she tipped the scales, in favor of Hillary Clinton. HT, I think the evidence, I mean, it's pretty blunt, but I think there is evidence, in fact, that the DNC tilted towards Hillary and Bernie Sanders kind of got the short end of the stick.
Yes. First of all, Donna Brazile was head of the DNC before Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and then she came after Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Right.
And we know the relationship that Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Hillary had, and clearly she put the thumb on the scale. But she didn't just disenfranchise or make it unfair for him. Also, O'Malley and the others that were running, and that's bad, and we cannot do that. And we've got to say what it is, and we've got to have an autopsy and clean it up.
And I agree. I mean, we don't need to go as far as Russia to look into these issues. I mean, there was some election fraud that happened here because, quite frankly, tipping the scales, disenfranchising the Democrat voter, that's wrong. If it was in the favor of one candidate, what about the Bernie Sanders supporters? I mean, they were disenfranchised in this process.
Well, they got less money. I don't know that they were disenfranchised. They still got to vote, but they didn't get all the materials, the voter list, things that Hillary Clinton got. The
party leadership was doing everything they could to support Mrs. Clinton. I mean, if you look at Donna Brazile herself, she was slipping questions when she was on CNN for the CNN debate.
Well, she says she gave them to everybody. I heard her say this on Wednesday night. Jay, let me ask you this. You live in Broward County, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz represents a district from Southwest Broward, where you live, down into Aventura and even parts of North in Miami Beach. Do you think that these revelations, these accusations about her handling the DNC chairmanship are going to affect her reelection?
I think there's several issues, and I think her opponents are going to bring that up. For example, the Republican candidate Carlos Reyes, who's the new candidate in this race, I'm sure he's going to be bringing up those issues. He's talking about it. I mean, it's not just DNC. There's some mismanagement at the congressional office as well, with that Pakistani individual who had access to all kinds of sensitive.
The IT guy.
Right. Yeah. But at the end of the day, what you'd say, like in a grocery store, right? Clean up on aisle 2. Both parties have a clean up on aisle 2, okay? Because you've got folks who have not been heard in the Democratic Party, people of color that have not been heard in the Democratic Party. There's a question about the white working class voter, how they've been heard in the Democratic Party. But in the Republican Party, you now have standard bearers that have been involved in sexual harassment, that are, giving dog whistles. You have the Breitbart section of the Republican Party that's giving voice to white supremacy. I'm so glad everybody got soul searching to do.
And good partnerships with Vladimir Putin. And
it's a tough crowd, right?
So glad that you bring up the nonpartisan issue. I mean, there's a cleanup that's required in aisle number 2. And the thing is that both the parties need to start listening to their base. They need to start behaving differently. They need to understand that this is not about individuals. This is about ideas and what's best for the country. Today, the dialogue has arrived at the point. I'm going to finish real quick.
Do you want to hear from the Congresswoman about this? We have not heard from her.
Yes, she refuses to really talk about it. Well, we've invited her.
Keep inviting her.
I invite her right now. Come on, Congresswoman, and talk about it. Before we run out of time, I do want to so much to talk about.
Yes.
I personally think that it was absurd and insulting that the Congressional Hispanic Caucus refused to admit Carlos Curbelo this week. I mean, he is a Republican.
I agree.
They're all Democrats,
And he
but
is Hispanic.
you know, he certainly is Hispanic.
And I will say this: the Congressional Black Caucus accepted
Mia Love.
Senator Mia Love, first African American female senator out of Utah, and also Tim Scott out of South Carolina is a member of the CBC. And those are both
and
Republicans.
I agree with Melba
so
that this is not. I mean, people need to start understanding that Democrat Party is not the only party for African Americans and minorities, or Republican Party is for. I mean, it's both parties. With
Diversity is a good thing.
Diversity is a good thing. I am one of the diverse people.
And we're glad you're
party.
adding diversity to the roundtable. So,
Absolutely.
Jana Renning, H.D. Smith, Melba Pearson, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, still to come another day, another sex-related accusation. And what should the consequences be? Glenna's going to have a comment on that.
Take a look at this beautiful shot, a live look right now from our Mount Sinai Medical Center cam.
And here is someone who is beautiful, Weather Authority meteorologist Jennifer Correa with your Sunday forecast. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Michael. Hi, Glenna. Thank you, and good afternoon to the both of you in South Florida. It's absolutely gorgeous out there. We are going to be sunny for the rest of Sunday, but there is a cold front now pushing into Central Florida, arriving into Tampa and Orlando area. Doesn't look so strong on radar, but you could tell the distinct difference between the temperatures. South of the front, of course, warm. Behind it, the cold air arriving into North Central Florida. In fact, there's about a 15-degree difference between Orlando and Gainesville. Orlando at 80 degrees, Gainesville in the mid-60s. So for us, we're warming up already into the lower 80s. We'll continue to do so as that cold front pushes southward, arriving overnight tonight. We could see a few showers tomorrow, but for the most part, will remain mostly cloudy Monday. A lot cooler, by the way, tomorrow, only in the upper 70s.
Jen, thanks. So it's Sunday afternoon. Is anyone else outed for sexual harassment today yet? If that question surprises you, it shouldn't. Hardly a woman you know has not been the recipient on some level of that kind of power play. Accused this week, locally, it's Florida's Democratic Party chair, Stephen Battelle. Nationally, we talked all about this, comedian turned Senator Al Franken, both accused of different levels of innuendo or action that come under that broad banner of sexual bullying behavior. They took some of the headlines briefly from Alabama judge and Senate candidate Roy Moore, who is accused of so much more. Pedophile behavior is a far different story. This issue has many different facets, and that's a big issue to consider with this snowballing movement of women who feel finally the time to speak up is now, finally a watershed moment of cultural awakening and change in politics, in the workplace, and in the community. The complicated question is, what should the consequences be for the varying patterns and practices of unacceptable behavior, current and or past? Part of that answer is easy. Pedophilia, sexual assault, those are crimes, period. But what about behavior that is offensive and or harmful? Do we consider the difference between the occasional act of frat boy behavior and the chronic pattern of a predator? What about the context of relationship? When someone in a powerful position abuses it with women who are subordinates, that's different than a colleague who has colossally bad judgment but is otherwise harmless. These are the kinds of questions that will frame how we as a compassionate community go forward. And consider this, if every man who has been a sexual bully was fired or removed or canceled or forced to resign, there would be a lot of openings. And so, what do you think? We invite you to weigh in on that or any topic you like, and here are some ways to reach us.
And you can reach us on Facebook, Twitter, and we hope to hear from you. Remember, as always, stay informed, get involved, have a great Sunday.
Take care.